This is not a dream. Not a dream. We are using your brain's electrical system as a receiver. We are unable to transmit through conscious neural interference. You are receiving this broadcast as a dream. We are transmitting from the year 2021. You are receiving this broadcast in order to alter the events that you are seeing. Our technology has not developed a transmitter strong enough to reach your conscious state of awareness. But this is not a dream.
On this episode of Unanswered Questions, we are talking about the classic John Carpenter film, Prince of Darkness. I was actually quite surprised how many unanswered questions that this film really had within it, and I figured what better way to get answers to these questions than to come to the scene of the crime itself. And this is not a dream.
Question number 1.
What is Barack talking about in his classroom?
So in the beginning of the film, good old Egg Shen is giving a lecture and discussing things like nature not being solid and time not being a constant. He says that nothing of what we think that we know about the physical world is true, and that logic collapses on the subatomic level into ghosts and shadows, which sounds like he's discussing the supernatural, and that this class is like on the paranormal or something, but it's actually about quantum physics. And no, quantum is not just a word that Marvel slaps in front of anything to make it sound more scientific. It's a real thing that we've only scraped the surface of understanding. Bear with me here, and I know that this is going a bit deep considering it's the first question, but it really does have a relevance to the movie, so
We're getting a little bit scientific here, but trust me, I'll make sure it doesn't get dull.
So first of all, when someone talks about quantum, they're talking about things on the subatomic level, so very, very small, on the level that requires an incredibly powerful microscope to see. So, to make this simple, the basis of quantum is that there are waves and particles, and that everything actually has both a wave and a particle nature. They act in both manners. Now, the electrons of an atom, which are technically particles, in order to exist, act like waves. Now, this shouldn't be possible, and it doesn't replicate when you get up to the macro level, so it's a huge mystery as to how it happens. Now, that right there is a gross oversimplification of quantum physics in general, but to simplify it even more, and to turn it how movies like to handle it, it's a way to kind of explain the unexplainable. You just say that something on the macro level is behaving like it would on the quantum level, and there you go. And, what does this have to do with Prince of Darkness? Pretty simple, since the film is completely about the merging of religion and the supernatural with the scientific realm, showing that the two coexist. Nature and order in this film's universe are breaking down, and this lost evil is beginning to rewrite reality. There's a point where the priest, because Donald Pleasant's character is literally just called the priest, says that evil exists within everyone, and that its existence is that on a subatomic level. It's described as an anti-reality particle that, when unleashed, will break our perceptions down. So essentially the film wants to take the notion of a particle defying physics and changing its reality and becoming a wave-natured entity into this creature. So normally having a character give a lecture in a movie that just so happens to align with stuff that comes up again later on in the movie is something silly. It happens quite a bit. But it does work here, since the priest chooses the class because they're talking about quantum physics. Question number 2.
Isn't Brian a little old for college?
So this is Brian and his mustache, and he's sort of our main character. He's played by Jameson Parker, mostly known for being one of the Simons from Simon and Simon, and he's the right Simon here, not the left Simon. He was 40 years old when the film was released, so not really of a college age, right? So first of all, he's clearly playing younger. But how much younger? One thing to point out is that even though it's commonly stated that the people in the film are college students, they're grad students, so they would clearly skew older. Unless they were super advanced, they'd be around 22 at the youngest. Interestingly enough, according to the Council of Graduate Schools, the average age of grad students is 33 years old, and that number has stayed pretty constant throughout the past several decades. With that in mind, having the character of Brian be in his early 30s wouldn't be too far out of place, and Parker would simply be playing a character less than 10 years younger than his actual self. And if you said that this guy was in his 30s, I don't think we'd all be looking at him saying, hey, that guy's too old. I'd look at him and say, oh yeah, early 30s. That looks about right. But if you want a more elaborate answer, more of like a tinfoil hat answer, there's the notion that another part of quantum physics is that all versions of reality exist simultaneously, with all possible variations coexisting on top of each other. Perhaps Brian is in his mid-20s or so, and we are visualizing the future version of the character along his timeline as an aspect of the notion of this universe's perception of time breaking down. Question number 3.
Who lit all those candles?
So when the priest takes Professor Barack down to check out the mysterious green cask for the first time, there's like 1,000,000 candles lit down there. And they're all burning, and it looks like they've been burning for a while. But I mean, it's not like candles last for that freaking long. It's pretty clear that the Loomis priest is not aware of the Brotherhood of Sleep before finding the little box, as when he reads Father Carlton's diary, he looks completely surprised. And when he goes to the church with the key, he approaches with an unsure manner, and it's apparent it's his first time there. Carlton is referred to as the guardian priest and was, theoretically, the only one stationed at this church. It's said that every day he opened the door to go down and check on things, and that this sect is secretive, and is mentioned that as he died, his tasks would go on to another, insinuating that there is only one guardian priest.
So who the hell is lighting all of those things?
I'm not going to count them all, but there's easily like 200 here. Some in the hall, some in the main chamber, but they're everywhere. Now, this might be silly to you guys, but I don't know, it's bugging me. The average candle lasts only between 7 to 9 hours, and we see at least a day go by since Carlton's death, so he could not have lit all these. Now, we saw the priest go there the day prior, so it's possible that he stayed overnight and had lit all of these in the morning, but to what purpose? Would he really go through all of that trouble? So obviously the culprit is the film's lighting team, but in the film, it can't even be members of the Brotherhood, since if there were other members, I would hardly think that they would sit out the events that are about to occur. They're not going to have access to that basement just to light things up and then take a hike. So the only answer is that it was the priest. This dude basically just woke up that morning, went downstairs, spent a good hour or two lighting things up, and then went to go pick up the dock because, you're extremely concerned about the return of an ancient evil. You gotta get that proper mood lighting going. Question number 4.
What's up with Kelly's bruise?
So Kelly here accidentally bumps into a random piece of lab equipment, and a little later on she reveals that the bruise from that bump is growing in size. It starts to take on the form of a symbol that they spot in the Brotherhood's book, a symbol that was taken from the Blue Oyster Cult's Agent of Fortune album. Later, when Kelly chugs the green goo, she becomes the host form for the evil, and they say that she was chosen. So, what they say is that although it has enough influence to control lesser minds, it needs a more complex body to control as its own. But what was the point of the mark? It just seems a little odd that the mark appears on some bruise from just like some piece of equipment. I mean, it might have been a little bit more relevant if, say, I don't know, she had bumped against the canister or something. So instead, it just seems odd.
Or does it?
It's important to note that the mark is not what takes her over. Although she does end up being the vessel for the evil, if she had somehow escaped the building before it spread to her, she probably would have remained normal. The mark simply noted that she was the vessel that was chosen to carry it. So why her? Well, look, I think that the mark's existence and choosing Kelly were actually connected. The fluid creature seems to feed on fear. Several acts it commits over the course of the film are expressly done to create fear in its observer, such as the bug man delivering the message, and Lisa typing on the computer. Creating doubt and fear are corrupting what it sees as good, appearing to be a methodology for it, leaning heavily into the concept that it has been confused for millennia with the devil, mixing up both of their MOs a little bit. The mark on Kelly's body was to be seen by the others to spread concern and fear for what it means, and choosing Kelly, who appears to be the most demure and innocent of the group, is a direct attack on the notion of wholesomeness. It's the equivalent of Pizzazzu choosing Reagan in The Exorcist. Corrupting the innocent is a part of its game, and spreading fear is what it does. Question number 5.
Wait. Jesus was an alien?
Yep, the premise here is that Jesus was an alien, or at least, as they state, had alien ancestry, which seems to insinuate that he was actually born here on Earth, but at least part of his family were aliens. The movie states that he was warning of the presence of this great evil and trying to spread word of its coming, and when enough people started to believe him, they had him killed. Then, the Roman Catholics basically adopted his story into their own, building their religion around it, and reducing this whole thing to basic good versus evil, instead of the all-encompassing cosmic horror that lives in all particles of everything. The greater implications of this is that, even though it's presented as a theological God versus devil scenario, this goes well beyond that. The thing in the cylinder, creature in the mirror, aren't what we would simply classify as the devil or the Antichrist. Nope, their origins actually stem from beyond the stars, with extraterrestrial beginnings and adversaries, which sounds less like a Christian theology and more in keeping with a Lovecraftian lore, with old gods and more cosmicness in its horror. Now, I realize that this is stated in the movie, and it's not so much an unanswered question as much as it is an unelaborated one, but I felt the need to go into this bit, which is pretty much just a quick line of dialogue in the film, in order to expand on the themes here and tie into one of the other things we need to discuss later. Question number 6.
Do the possessed people die?
The fluid gets out of its chamber, taking people over and possessing them. They get it to Susan, Lisa, Calder, Mullins, Kelly, Leahy, and eventually Lomax, that white guy character who's just kinda there. Doesn't really have many lines, and he doesn't do much, but he does get possessed for like 3 seconds. Now, most of these characters are given mortal wounds, like Mullins getting his neck broken, or Calder stabbing himself, so it's pretty clear that after the evil influence left, they would just go back to being dead. But what about like Susan, Lisa, and Lomax? We do see them in the alley for a brief moment after it all happens, and they do appear to be dead. Their eyes are open as the fluid leaves their system, and remain so when we see them again a moment later, and we don't see them at the end when police and ambulances are there. So are they just dead? I would guess so, but considering all 3 of them went headfirst out a window, landing on the concrete below, did the fall kill them? If any of the possessed people had actually not sustained life-ending injuries, would they revert to normal when the fluid left? All of the homeless people just kind of wander away after the evil is gone, so would the same have happened to them? I'm gonna go with no, mainly because of what is said when Kelly is being taken over, and they state that it appears as if her insides are being altered. It appears as if the fluid gets inside of you and completely alters your insides. Obviously, what it did to Kelly is a bit more extreme, altering her outsides as well, but it would seem as if there's a sort of a transformation that occurs with those infected by the fluid, as opposed to those just under the sway of the evil, like the vagrants. And that may all come down to 2 people, and that is Leahy and Lomax, 2 characters that we don't necessarily see die in the course of the film. I guess it's debatable whether or not you want to say that getting hit on the head by this 2x4 would have been enough to kill Leahy, and possibly Lomax broke his neck in the fall from this ladder. I mean, he does look to be in a rather awkward position right here, but I guess it's debatable whether or not they died. But it is pretty clear that they are dead at the end of the film. So, even though they didn't survive the events of the film due to the characters defending themselves and other things, it's pretty clear that even if they had simply detained them and tied them to a chair, their fates were still sealed. Question number 7.
Who's sending the message?
One of the most effective parts of the film is the dream messages from the future. As explained in the film, when the characters go to sleep, they all have the same dream, and that's of a dark figure exiting the church. It's explained that it's a message from the year 1999, warning of what's going to happen. They're sent using tachyons, which are hypothetical subatomic particles that move faster than light, and because of this, they're not bound to the laws of relativity. And I would get into this further, but I think you're more interested in the horror movie aspects here, not necessarily the theoretical physics stuff, so I'll just say that they can time travel. But who sent the message is not really discussed, except to say that all of the members of the Brotherhood of Sleep have the dream, and now everyone in that church do as well. So the most likely answer here is that it is the Brotherhood itself that's sending the message from the future, but the implication here is that the sect actually created itself. It's not stated exactly how long the members have been getting the signals, but it can be implied that the message was tied to the building itself, which they say was built in the 1500s. If the church was built there ages ago and they started getting those dreams immediately, they might have seen it as a premonition of what was to come, brought the container there to guard it, and formed the Brotherhood to watch over it and help prevent what they saw. I mean, it might have been a better plan to move the container away from where they saw it, bringing about the end of the world, but they may have seen the place as important as to what was about to happen, under the notion of keeping your friends close and your enemies closer. Question number 8.
Why didn't the vagrants just go in and kill everybody?
This is always one that digs at me, since the fluid thing clearly had an influence on the outside world and is clearly commanding this small army of followers led by Freddy's foster dad. Its ultimate goal is to unleash its father from the mirror, the anti-god, from whatever dimension that he's stuck in. The people in the church can only serve as a hindrance to that goal, and finally they stop his plan, so why even let them be there? The homeless people specifically trap them in there and kill them when they try to leave. But there were so many of them, why not just enter the church, kill all the normies, and allow the big dude to be free? I know that it was taking them over by using the fluid, but it clearly was taking a while, and obviously that wasn't that good of a plan since it failed. But it already had minions, so it's clear that it didn't need the people in the church. So just command the vagrants to go in earlier that day, kill everyone, and you're good. No more opposition and a clearer path to rebirth. Well, I think this one ties into the earlier question that I think that the entity needed to create that fear, that dread and corruption of the innocents. It's part of what it does. Its plan isn't just to arrive on Earth, it's to spread its evil influence and loss and hopelessness the world over. Think of it as a terraforming of evil. And it's hard to create an atmosphere amongst dead bodies. That's why it was even taking its time with spraying people. The longer it took, the more dread took over, creating the environment that the father needed to thrive in. Question number 9.
How do you trap an ancient evil in a mirror anyway?
So the thing in the mirror, the anti-god, has been trapped there for a very long time and is described as being extremely powerful and ancient. So if it was so powerful, how did they manage to trap it there? So for this one, you kind of have to fill in the blanks of the information that they give you, because there's not a lot, and what they do talk about is pretty vague, but the one solid bit that we're given is that Jesus is part of an alien race with alien ancestry. But given that he was human-ish and able to be killed by humans, I think it's safe that when they say that he had alien ancestry, they mean it's somewhere down his line. I think they're saying that Jesus had descended from aliens that were on Earth and bred with humans, diluting down to something more human than alien, although with abilities that were greater than a regular Joe, or Joseph in this case. I would say that the race he's descended from were much more powerful and much, much older. You could theorize that they and the anti-god were both alien races, having come here eons ago and battling it out with what we would call the good alien race managing to banish the evil force somewhere, and then integrating on Earth in the interest of creating a way to monitor and contain the entity. Saying that Jesus was trying to spread the word of warning about the Force would seem to imply that he was actually the beginnings of the Brotherhood of Sleep, and considering that they said that the Catholic Church was covering up the story and collapsing it into their own, it makes sense that the Brotherhood would be kept hidden from the Vatican. They clearly knew that the Jesus alien's message was dangerous to theirs, but also aware that he was telling the truth, so the Brotherhood would have had to have been created in order to enact what they knew was coming. Question number 10.
Couldn't Catherine have just pushed Kelly into the mirror?
I don't love this question, but it's actually come up a few times with people that I discussed a movie with, so I'm going to talk about it. In the end, as Catherine sees the situation as dire and that evil is going to triumph, she has to make a drastic decision. She sees her new love about to be killed and watches as the possessed Kelly is pulling the end of the world through a mirror, so she makes the ultimate sacrifice and pushes her and her own self through the mirror. As the gateway is then destroyed, leaving the anti-god, its child, and Catherine trapped on the other side. But why did she have to jump through? Couldn't she have just pushed Kelly through and stayed on our side of things? Well, look, the answer to this one is simple to me, since you can kind of sort of put yourself in that situation. You have the element of surprise and the chance to save the entire world. You don't want to run up and push and have it not be enough. It's your one chance. So Catherine made a decision to make sure that the job was done right, even if it cost her her own life. Question number 11.
Why does the axe destroy the mirror instead of just passing into the other dimension?
So after they go tumbling into the other world, the priest throws a fire axe at the mirror, which shatters it, preventing it from being used as a portal and closing it off. But why would this even happen? Why wouldn't it just pass through the portal and also enter the water world? The priest is pretty proud of himself, saying,
I stopped it.
But you know what?
He didn't.
The axe smashed the mirror because at that point it was just that. A mirror. That particular mirror was not special. We saw Kelly earlier try to use a pocket compact to get her devil pops out, but it was too small. But the opening looked exactly the same. It even seemed to come from the same place. So here's the scoop. The instant that Catherine and Kelly went tumbling through, the gateway was closed. The thing that made the portal open in the first place was the Antichrist, or whatever you want to call it, reaching into it. Only it had the ability to do that, and could do it with any mirror. As soon as she goes through, the danger is over. If the Kelly thing could simply go back through that gateway, she could go back through any mirror. Anywhere. There's nothing special about that one. The smashing of the mirror did nothing except make the priest feel like he did something and take the glory for himself, which is pretty comparable to what they're saying happened a few thousand years ago. Catherine saved the world alone. She did it. And then you have this guy who spent a portion of the conflict hiding in a room saying, I did it. Without once saying anything about Catherine. The same character who lambasted the Catholic Church for basically doing the same thing a couple thousand years ago. It's a pretty crazy moment and a great bit of insight into a character with just a single line of dialogue. Question number 12.
What's up with that ending?
So here it is, the biggest question of the movie and the entire reason why I chose this movie for an entry here. Because after everything is over, we see Brian have a dream, and it's the Brotherhood dream again. Still warning that the evil is coming, and this is the first time that we hear the full year of 1999. But the dream appears to be different, since the figure that we saw earlier is replaced with Catherine now, emerging from the church, implying that she is now the vessel for the anti-god. Now, this leaves open several options. First of all, this could all just be a dream. He's obviously had a traumatic experience and just saw people he cared about die right in front of him, so a nightmare, built around a previous dream he had, is not out of the question. Especially since we see a second part to it as he awakens to see Catherine, now the host for the fluid thing instead, in his bed. This is revealed to be just a dream, so it's entirely possible that the church dream was as well. It could also be a continuation of the dream from earlier, and that we didn't see the full scope of it, and it's the same transmission. Possibly earlier, as we saw the shape in the door, its form is not fully taken yet, and it would always have become Catherine, and that was the prophecy from the start. So their purpose at the church wasn't actually to stop anything, but to perpetuate it. And the third option is that they changed the future, but only nominally. The figure that we see earlier appears to be a man, and obviously later is Catherine, so possibly they didn't prevent the end of things, but merely changed who would be the eventual emissary. This seems more likely the scenario, since the sequence does appear to have changed, even though, as we've seen through the discussion of quantum physics earlier, this might simply be a question of perception. This may have always been the prophecy and the same transmission, but it's now being seen differently, much like waves and particles. Looked at in one way, it looks like this, but the image is shaped by the viewer. The fact that the figure seems to have no form earlier, but later looks like cat, might be deeper than we think. So there's a discussion in a film earlier about Schrodinger's cat, in which there's a famous theory. It theorizes that if you take a cat and put it in a sealed box, and there's a button on the box, and pressing that box creates a 50-50 chance of a poison being released into it. So you press the button, and now there's an even chance that the cat is both dead or alive in the box. It's 50-50, and you can't tell. The theory states that at that point, from a quantum perspective, the cat exists in a state of both life and death. Both possibilities are real until the box is opened and the outcome is observed. Observing the state of the cat collapses all the possibilities into one, and that becomes the reality.
I know that's an oversimplification of the concept, but I don't have a lot of time here.
Anyway, the figure in the dream is the cat. Its form is untaken and uncertain until it's perceived. Earlier, when we see the figure, its quantum positioning is still undetermined because the defining event that decides its shape hasn't occurred. It's everyone in the church and anyone that could possibly be the host form all in one, which is why it doesn't have any features. But in the end, after that moment has happened, and all of the varios have been chopped down to one, and only one person goes through that gateway, and there's now a singular possibility for the shape to take, the realities collapse into one. And go figure, it's Catherine.
Or Cat. I mean, there's no way that name is not a coincidence, right?
Two other things to note here is that the dreams happened to either the people in the church or to the members of the Brotherhood of Sleep. So Brian having this dream while not fitting either of those criteria would kind of seem to indicate that it's merely that, a dream. Although here's the interesting and mind-effing part, and that's that the dream takes place in 1999. Although they don't know that while everything is going on, but they do know that it's in the future. So if the dream was showing the evil emerge from a church in the future and not, when they were going through all of this, did they realize that they would succeed? I mean, the dream showed the entity coming out in the future, which means that there's no possible way for it to arrive now. It would seem that the incident that we watched was always doomed to fail, which kind of implies that the dream was never warning them about what they were about to go through right now. So it's a strong possibility that the dream was intended to warn them that they were not the actual final line against it, and that the fight will truly continue on. Which doesn't actually rule out that it was just Brian having a bad dream. It still can be. It can just be Brian's subconscious reminding him of this fact, and him realizing that the real fight is still to come. Question number 13.
This is considered a part of the Apocalypse trilogy, but are they all connected?
So Carpenter often refers to this movie, The Thing, and In the Mouth of Madness as the Apocalypse trilogy, which is pretty wild considering that there's really only one of them that we see in Apocalypse. I mean, in The Thing, it's actually fairly possible that the menace of the Thing was averted and no apocalypse would be forthcoming. And in this one, the end is ambiguous, so it's entirely possible that, again, no endo the worldo. But maybe there's a greater link here. Maybe there's something else, because in terms of world's ending, Escape from LA has a darker finale. And in terms of, hey, a world-ending menace may or may not have been destroyed, that could apply to They Live as well. But I get his overall theme.
That being said, maybe they can be linked another way.
Let's look at the overall thematics. The first movie, The Thing, is about an immensely powerful, shapeless creature from space whose introduction to our world would result in its end in converting everything on it into a form of itself. Next, Prince of Darkness introduces a supernatural enemy that is trying to get to our world, and in the process converts things around it into a form of itself. And it's also arguably from space, and also seems formless. Finally, In the Mouth of Madness involves an ancient race of elder gods who are trying to reach our world, and they do. Converting everyone into a form of itself. So, hey, knowing how much Carpenter loves him some Lovecraft, isn't there the possibility that all three of these threats are a form of the old gods? Mouth of Madness is straight up that. But with the notion that these elder forces are essentially just, things from another world, what if their origins are the same? What if the Thing is just part of an offshoot of a world corrupted by those forces? What if the anti-god was an early form that crossed over and was averted? And what if Mouth of Madness is the remains of that race, now ready to make their transition and finally completing their goal? I know that it's a bit of a reach to connect what are probably just what Carpenter refers to his films that feature a downbeat overall tone and ending and are a little more horror geared than Snake shutting down Earth or aliens exposed on Earth, but I like to think that it does make sense. It's like Prince of Darkness is a sort of bridge between the first and third entries, blending the science and mysticism into one unified universe.
So there you have it. It's 13 questions, hopefully satisfying answers for you, and about a movie that I really enjoy. I feel like it's actually kind of an underrated movie. I got a chance a couple years back to actually watch the movie inside the church, which is now a theater, and I got to watch it inside. It was pretty cool, and I really enjoyed this movie. There's a lot of mystery to it, a lot of really cool elements. It definitely has some scarier moments that I remember from my youth that really stuck with me, and I dig it, and I hope you like these questions. It's a very strange movie. It had a lot more questions than I thought I was going to have out of it, but sure enough, 13 that there was, and I hope you enjoyed them. Let me know if you agree with my answers, or if you have any other questions about this film of your own, different things that you would like to have answered, or different answers to the questions that I have for you. But, if you're going to disagree with what I say, well, I have a message for you. You're not gonna like it. But you should like the video. You should also subscribe to the channel, do all that kind of stuff, and check out my patrons, because these guys do help keep the channel going. And you can do the same thing at patreon.com/movietimelines. I'd appreciate that. And I'll see you guys all very shortly for another great video. And I gotta go because there's Alice Cooper just showed up for some reason, and he has a bike, and I don't know what's going on.